Welcome to our first lecture in American Government. This is Chapter 1, American Government and Civic Engagement. Chapter 1 is pretty straightforward. It's right around 20 pages of reading. I'm also asking that you read the Declaration of Independence, which is also provided in the content area for the immediately after this chapter's reading. So let's get started. Chapter 1 is all about not only our government and the types of governments when we look at oligarchies, easy for me to say, democracy, monarchy, that type of thing. You need to be able to differentiate between the different types of governments and a democracy. So, one of the key features of the United States American national government is your civic duty to vote. So, what you have to keep in mind here, from the very beginning of our nation, in fact, before the beginning of our nation, which is basically the offshoot of the Declaration of Independence, people fought and sacrificed to obtain your ability to do things like vote. Unfortunately, many people nowadays ignore being civically engaged. They don't vote. You might be one of them. You might have just turned 18. I'm going to go ahead and encourage you to register for vote. Make sure you're voting. This is an election year. We need to get that taken care of as soon as possible. And I want your voice to be heard. And I want you to treat this course as an opportunity to better understand the system that you are participating in, and for you, quite frankly, to become what's called a politician's worst nightmare, an informed voter. So, let's keep moving. Why is it important to be engaged in society, in your political system? Well, if you've ever, hopefully you haven't, but if you've ever called 911 and someone showed up to help you, that's a part of that system. Somewhere along the line, an elected official that you as a voter can put into or out of office makes decisions that affects EMS, fire, police, etc., on a national level, national defense. Those things are funded by you, the taxpayer, and you're a part of the tax base, whether you're paying a property tax, a sales tax, an income tax. No matter what you're doing, you're participating in society. But if you're not voting, you're participating, you're paying for it, and you're not giving yourself a say. So keep in mind, you need to be civically engaged because you're going to be financially engaged either way. Now, let's talk about some different types of goods. Now, this is figure 1.3 in your reading. Now, here it's a little tough to see, but I'm going to break it down and make it really simple. A type of good basically is broken down by two questions. The first question is a good excludable or non-excludable? Excludable is something, say, I buy a cell phone and you can't buy that cell phone once I bought it, okay? That also makes it rivalrous, okay? So rivalry, is a good rival or not? So excludable. If a good is something that I can own which prevents you from owning it, it's excludable. If my participation in a good or service does not prevent you from participating in that good or service, it's non-excludable. So that's the first question. Is this good or service excludable? The second question is it rival in consumption? Is it rivalrous or non-rivalrous? If I go out in the ocean and I catch a fish, a red snapper, that's a red snapper you can't catch. Thus, red snapper deep sea fishing is rivalrous. If me participating in a good or service is not rivalrous, meaning if I consume it, it doesn't prevent you from consuming it, then it's non-rivalrous. So let's give some examples here. If a good is both excludable and rivalrous, meaning me purchasing it makes it mine, not yours, and me consuming it makes it you're unable to consume it yourself, then it's a private good. A privately owned cell phone, an automobile you buy, are all types of private goods. If we're in class and you have a Coca-Cola on your desk, You bought that Coke. That prevents me from buying that Coke. I can't just come over there and start drinking your drink, especially in the middle of a pandemic. If I did, you have some property rights. It's excludable. That's your drink. And the fact that you're drinking it prevents me from drinking that particular 16 to 24 ounces of Coca-Cola. That makes it rivalry. So that's a private good. Now, keeping with excludable, meaning if you use it, I can't. Let's go, what if it's non-rivalrous? What are some examples there? That means something that just because you have it doesn't mean I can. So if it's excludable, meaning you buy it, that gives you access to it. I don't buy it. I can't have it. But it's non-rivalrous, like a membership. That could be a toll good. Cable TV is a good example. Private school education is a good example of a toll good. If I buy cable TV and you don't, the cable company is going to prevent you from having cable. All right? If I buy cable and you decide you want to buy cable, I can't prevent you from buying cable. So it's a toll good. It is excludable in that charter or whoever doesn't have to sell you cable or give you cable if you don't buy it. But the fact that you have it doesn't prevent me from calling them up and getting it. So cable TV is a toll good. Same thing with private school. Private school is something you pay extra for. If you don't pay for it, you're excluded from it. But if I use up a spot in a private school, that doesn't prevent you from applying for a spot for your kids in private schools. Private schools are toll good as well. Now, on excludability, let's look at non-excludability. Let's say, now I used the example of a red snapper in deep sea fishing a minute ago. If a good is non-excludable, meaning if I go out on my boat and go deep sea fishing, that doesn't prevent you from going out on your boat and going deep sea fishing. We both can go fishing. All right? But it is rivalrous in that if I catch a particular red snapper, you can't catch that same fish. Okay? So freshwater fish in the ocean are common goods. Me using them can't prevent you from using them. You legally cannot be stopped from going out in the international waters and fishing. Okay? But if you catch all the fish and leave none for me, it's rivalrous. It's a common good. Okay? Now, if something's non-excludable, meaning you can't be prevented from doing it, but it's also non-rivalrous, meaning I can't prevent you from using it, you can't prevent me from using it. It is non-excludable, non-rivalrous. It is a public good. A good example is a beach. Okay? If I decide to go to Folly Beach this weekend, that doesn't prevent you from deciding to go to Folly Beach. My decision doesn't prevent you. If I sit on the beach, it doesn't prevent you from sitting on the beach. So it's non-excludable, non-rivalrous. Okay? The big thing to keep in mind here is two questions. Excludability and rival and consumption. Okay? If it's excludable and rivalrous, it's a private good. If it's not excludable, but it is rivalrous, it's a common good. If it's excludable but non-rivalrous, it's a toll good. Sometimes these, instead of toll goods, they're sometimes called club goods. If you've taken me for macroeconomics, we talk about club goods. Club goods and toll goods are the same thing. If it's non-excludable, non-rivalrous, it's a public good. Now, we run into some problems with this half of the goods. Common goods, there's something called tragedy of the commons. Think of people overfishing in the ocean. Okay, if they decimate a species, that's something that you can't enjoy. You can't keep them from going out there and hunting whales, but every whale they kill is one that you can't either fish or enjoy. All right, that's tragedy of the commons, common goods. Another problem is public goods. I can't keep you from enjoying a public park in Spartanburg County that my tax dollars paid for, but if you don't live in Spartanburg County, you didn't pay for that park, but I cannot keep you out of that park. A public park is a public good. So if I'm paying taxes and you aren't, you can still enjoy it. It's non-excludable. I can't keep you out of there. My dollars paid for it, yours didn't. And it's non-rivalrous though. I can go show up in that park as well. So public good While up here in the commons, it's tragedy of the commons, in the public good, we have what's called the free rider problem. So if you're a non-Spartanburg County resident, you don't own property, or you haven't paid any taxes, and I own property and I'm a Spartanburg County resident, and I pay taxes on a public park, but you don't, I can't prevent you from using it because it's non-excludable. But your use can't prevent me from using as well. It's non-rivalrous. But the problem related to someone not paying towards that public good is that it's non-rivalrous, non-excludable, so people can take advantage of it. Same thing applies if you call 911 in Spartanburg County and you haven't paid any property taxes here. 911 is going to show up to help you, thank goodness. But it might be at a cost of someone else who actually does pay for it. So the free rider problem is real. So we talked a little bit about different forms of government. I want you to read about that, but you're also going to have to figure out different forms of goods that we'll talk about in here. Again, fishing provides income as well as food for many Americans. Without government restrictions, however, the numbers of fish that can be caught or fish population, they could decline. If you've ever watched the show Deadliest Catch, it's a common resource and it has to be regulated, or else the crab fishermen would fish those stone crabs or whatever it is they're in season. They'd fish them to death, to extinction, and then you wouldn't be able to use it. It makes it more rivalrous, so it has to be regulated. Other things that being civically engaged are, you're subject to the circumstances in which your local government, state government, federal government, how they go about their meetings. New England is famous for town halls where they get together and they discuss direct democracy. They have a lot of town halls where they talk directly to their politicians, directly to their regulators. Okay. So this map of the world shows different forms of government that currently exist. Countries that are colored blue have some form of representative democracy, although some have varying degrees of political power. It's going to be awesome this semester. We're going to have opportunity to look at a lot of different systems. But countries that are more red, like China, Vietnam, Cuba, they're more of an oligarchic. I can't even say that word. I want to say oligopoly because I'm used to saying that in terms of macroeconomics. An oligarchy. So basically you have a few in power in the government and a lot without it. Okay, they don't have voices. Countries that are yellow are monarchies where people play little part in governing. Generally speaking, the monarchies, the big one right there in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia. Generally speaking, they're pretty benevolent monarchies that remain today. The oligarchies, see, there you go, you can work your way through it. The oligarchies tend to be a little more authoritarian. Think China, think Russia, Cuba, a lot of top-down government, which we're going to talk more about in this course. Thanks for bearing with me in my struggles with pronunciation. Just a few little takeaways from the chapter here. The four most recent U.S. presidents have graduated from an Ivy League university. You know, on the one hand, that can make you pretty discouraged, and they're like, oh man, I got to go to Dartmouth, Harvard, Brown, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, Penn to have a chance to be president. Well, George Washington wouldn't like that plan. We're going to talk about a little bit about that as well in this class, but the system sort of is set up a little bit like a haves and a have-nots. Regardless of Republican or Democrat, you're going to see some from both here. It is a little bit of like the ruling elite has developed a little more. So there is some worry about an oligarchy developing within our democracy. But we have two choices when we consider this. We can throw our hands up and say, it is what it is. Or you can become involved and push for some reform. So if nothing else, you can demand that a candidate be more representative of you. Now, what's one of the things that you can do? And fracking is a relatively new term, so my spell checker here thinks fracking's an an error, a misspelling here. It's not. Fracking is basically where you drill under the ground and you start going parallel to a lot of water supplies looking for natural gas. Well, the problem is with that, when you open up new caverns under there, your water and the gas can become coalesced, if you will. And it's even gotten so bad that some people's drinking water has been tainted by natural gas, and you literally can light it on fire. So you're thinking you come in from a nice little walk or a jog or something. Oh man, I really want a tall cup of water. Hopefully you're not a smoking type, but if you are the smoking type and you light one up and your cup of water catches on fire, that's a little alarming. So a lot of people have become advocates against fracking. All right. So this is a person up in Ohio protesting fracking, and an announcement of a public meeting regarding fracking that illustrates some of the trade-offs involved in the practice that might of what might be. So, not being informed, not being aware of what's happening in your community, it can be as serious as something as like water that literally catches fire. It could be issues of immigration. It could be issues of racial injustice. It is your duty as an American, people have fought and died on your behalf, to stand up for what you believe in. It's also your duty to realize that the system sometimes works in your favor and sometimes it doesn't. Some of the best advice I've ever gotten is definitely fight for what you think is right, but when that fight is over, move on. That said, if there's complete injustice, I say keep fighting. But if you're the type of cat who's going to be involved and look to make the world better, you're my type of cat. All right. Figure 1-9, one of the cool things about this book is it looks back on history. And the print you see here was published in 1870. So this is post-Civil War, right towards the end of the Civil War and everything's Reconstruction, that type of thing. Celebrates the extension of the right to vote to African-American men. The very scenes show legal rights black slaves did not have that were obtained. We are actually in the year 2020 coming up on the 100-year anniversary of the right for women to vote. So African-American men that were freed slaves could vote in 1870. Women, whether they be African-American, white, whatever, didn't even get the right to vote until 1920. So think about that. 60 years, 6 decades later, male slaves were allowed to vote before female. Now, if you happen to be an African-American female freed slave, you got 6 more decades before your voice mattered. Isn't that incredible? Man. So sometimes in here we need to learn a little history. And while it's not a history course, we're going to talk about the constructs of this course from a historical perspective. Now, this is a polling station, a nice line, and I remember voting in this election in 2008, and it brought out so many people who had never voted before because there was a different type of candidate. And of course, I'm talking about the eventual President Barack Obama. It brought out young and old alike, and lines were through the roof. It was an all-time high for civic participation and civic engagement. We have a potential interesting election later this year that we'll see what the lines look like for that too. Quite frankly, I hope the lines aren't quite as long, selfishly, because I want to get in and vote and get out. But I hope you're planning on voting yourself. So another form of civic engagement is volunteerism, willing to get out and physically help your community. Do things like building houses, feeding those that are hungry. This is an Occupy Wall Street protest in September 2011, where people got out and helped and voted and had their voices heard. Regardless of your feelings towards what a protester or whatever's message is, you have to recognize that starting with the First Amendment, they have the right to protest. All right. These cats, we'll read up more about it in the reading. I'm not going to get into it here for brevity. So we start looking at the political process. It all comes down to voting. So when it comes to voting, which party do you affiliate? When you look nationally, the biggest group tend to be independent, followed by Democrats, followed by Republicans. Okay. When it comes to most politics, most people see themselves pretty split down the middle, slightly Democrat. And which party do people prefer to be president in when the 2016 campaign? It was slightly Democrat, yet many more of those independents voted Republican, and that's how you ended up with current President Donald Trump's upset of candidate Hillary Clinton. So, young Americans like yourself are more likely to identify as independent rather than a Democrat or Republican. And as a third party member myself, I'm not really a party member, a third party identifier. So, I'm more of an independent. I tend to lean libertarian, just as a full disclosure. I vote for people you never heard of. Younger voters tend to lean more in a liberal direction. And as they age, the voting tends to lead more in a conservative direction. So younger voters tend to lean more Democrat, but more are independent than anything. And as a reminder in this course, we're going to talk about the left. We're going to talk about the right. We're going to talk about donkeys. We're going to talk about elephants. But we're not going to talk about, quote unquote, our candidate. We're just going to examine the construct and make some conclusions from there. Now, I want to shift gears here really quickly to back to Brightspace, just so we make sure we're getting in everything we need. Okay, here's Brightspace. Here's your course home. This is make sure you've listened to the introduction, an overview of Brightspace, and then come over here to the content tab. Click on content. While it's loading, this lecture will appear under this. This is actually the first lecture, so I'm going to populate it in there. You have your syllabus here with everything you need. Okay, overview of the syllabus. Here's a rubric for your final paper, and then the reading. Okay, so this week by Sunday night, you do have a quiz on the reading. So you have the full textbook here. Chapter 1, American Government and Civic Engagement. You can click on that. And then look, your reading will populate right here. And so you can keep turning pages and reading and doing whatever it is you need to do. Now, I just went over to the Declaration of Independence reading. The Declaration is put in here. I think this is incredibly important as you jump off, and definitely on the quiz, jump off studying American national government to know how it all started. So basically, the Declaration of Independence is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is mostly our grievances with, King George. Some things, taxation without representation. A lot of things were going on during this time period that led to the Declaration of Independence, which was finalized and roughly published around July 4th, 1776. You definitely should take Hanson or Cheek for U.S. History 1 to learn how not everything, it's not like you see the photo where everybody's in the room together signing it. That thing was signed over time in a matter of days. So there was no one big time, but all of this did come together, and you had all these signatures down at the bottom of it. Okay. So the first third is a lot of the complaints. Hey, you ravaged our coast, burned our towns, you're taxing us without representation, you're putting army people into our homes, you're kicking us out. We are not happy about it. Okay. So what are we going to do about it? It's our right to declare independence from you, and that's exactly what we're going to do, and signed by blah, blah, blah. And the biggest signature that you'll see is John Hancock at the towards the bottom of the document. where he signed in huge letters. So if anyone ever says, hey, put your John Hancock on this, it's a huge signature. The reason why that was such a big deal is everyone that signed the Declaration of Independence immediately became a fugitive against the king. And John Hancock said, well, if I'm going to sign it, you're going to see it. So he did a huge signature at the end. Definitely read the Declaration of Independence. It sets the stage for everything that develops out of it. We're going to move from the Declaration of Independence into the Federalist Papers and the Constitution in next week's lecture. Thank you so much for listening to this lecture. Make sure you are keeping up with what is due. Again, right off the bat, explore Brightspace. You need to post your introduction in the discussion areas. That discussion will end August 23rd, so that's this Sunday at 11:59. It is a graded discussion. It should be the easiest one of the course. Chapter 1 quiz is due by Sunday evening. You should also have read the Declaration of Independence and Chapter 1, which is a very short reading. And then we'll roll right into Chapter 2 next week, have our first in-person lecture. Be checking your email. I'll be sending you some details about lecture just as soon as enrollment numbers have leveled out. Hope you guys are doing well. Welcome to the course.